Hello, my name is Dwight Pettit. I'm an attorney here in Baltimore City and have been practicing law in the Maryland area for exactly 40 years this year. 3 years before that was with the Small Business Administration in Washington, D.C. after coming out of Howard University. Law school, before that, of course, Howard University undergrad. I've had a very general practice of law here in Baltimore. But it has lent itself more to the area of civil rights. Recently, doing a lot of police brutality cases, excessive force cases. Before that, doing the regular criminal cases, as well as civil rights, Title VII, employment cases, etc. Is how I sort of got started in Baltimore City. In fact, in terms of police cases, we won the largest verdict in the nation, and possibly the nation, the nation and possibly the state and possibly the nation, to put it correctly. And that was a verdict in 2004 for excessive force, was $105 million. Since that, we have handled a lot of what I call the new civil rights litigation, and that is police brutality. In terms of citizens' rights, constitutional rights, etc. My practice, though, is a general practice which lends itself to other areas of law, based in constitutional principles, etc. But as a result, before that, I was engaged in the process of writing a book, which I have just completed. That book is entitled Under Color of Law. And it took me 12 years in the writing of that book, and the book is just being released and by the publisher iUniverse. It coincides with my practice anniversary, as I indicated earlier, 40 years in the practice of law. But the book is basically about my life. It's a biography of my life, along with my family, in particular my father, who was very, very active and very strong in the civil rights movement. And I promised him, while he was ill and on his deathbed, I promised him that I would write the book and tell our story. And the book is available through Amazon.com, it's available through www.iUniverse, which is the publisher, as I said, and all through also Barnes & Noble. The book is basically describes the three major cases that I was involved as a plaintiff as well as a lawyer. I always and often say that I'm one of the few people, and maybe the only person in the United States, whose life is recorded in the three federal reporters of our nation. And those cases were Pettit versus the Board of Education. It's my case. My father was the guardian, I was the child plaintiff. And then Pettit versus the United States, which was the case that I brought on behalf of my father because of what he suffered in terms of discrimination in his employment as an engineer here in Aberdeen, Maryland. And the third case is Pettit versus the Board of Law Examiners. Believe it or not, while all this was going on, I was denied admission to the Maryland Bar and had to go to federal court in terms of that issue. So those are the three cases that the book builds around and develops, as well as some of the other high-profile cases that I've handled over the years. Cases such as Mike Tyson's civil litigation, Ray Lewis's civil litigation, other major cases that have been up to the Court of Appeals and to the U.S. Supreme Court that have been of issue not only locally but nationally. But the whole situation developed in terms of how the book starts is with my father, who was one of the first, maybe the first black engineer hired here in Maryland at a place called Fort Holabird, where he was an engineer. And at that point in time, we lived in a place called Turner Station, which is a very, very popular area of Maryland in Baltimore County. And he was suddenly transferred to Aberdeen, Maryland, because his job closed out and phased out his division while he was at Fort Holabird. And we moved to Aberdeen, Maryland, and I was taken out of a school, Solo's Point in Turner Station, which was basically all, if not predominantly, or predominantly, if not all, black. And all of a sudden made the transition into the woods of Aberdeen, 30 miles north of Baltimore, going toward New York, which was practically, that environment on the military base was practically all white. And so it was a tremendous transition for me as a kid. And even though Brown versus Board of Education had come down from the Supreme Court in 1954, the schools in Harford County, where this base was located, were still segregated, and they were integrating, on a stair-step plan. Now, I think one of the real relevant and one of the unusual aspects about my case is not only that my father go to the NAACP and get legal help to bring a suit against the Harford County Board of Education, but one of his lawyers at the time was the great Thurgood Marshall, who would go on to be a Supreme Court justice, or one of the lawyers that he retained, who became my lawyer. And that trial team was composed of Thurgood Marshall, Attorney Jack Greenberg, one of the great lawyers of our time in terms of one of the first African-American lady lawyers in the state of Maryland, Juanita Jackson Mitchell, and a lawyer by the name of Tucker Daring. And they brought the case against Harford County in the United States District Court here in Baltimore. And after 2 years of litigation, we won, and I was ordered into Aberdeen Proving Ground. I'm sorry, not Aberdeen Proving Ground, but Aberdeen High School, which is also the high school of Cal Ripken and other notables. And by court order, I was the first African-American male to be ordered into Aberdeen High School. Well, that was not really a problem with me because I was an athlete. I played football, I wrestled, I played baseball. And so the student body accepted me sort of with open arms. I say in my book, Under Color of Law, that as athletes, if you can run the ball, throw the ball, kick the ball, catch the ball, America has a different acceptivity towards you, a different receptiveness. So I didn't really suffer in my 3 years in high school, but my father did. All types of horrendous actions were taken against my father. He was a GS-11 at the time at Aberdeen Proving Ground, and he was denied promotion for 14 years. They put rebel flags up in his office. They played Dixie when he would open his office door, when he tried to say something at a meeting. He was denied secretarial services. He was denied telephone services. He was referred to by the perennial boy. So for 14 years he suffered and endured this, and Mrs. Mitchell became his lawyer at the time, and she took his case into the administrative process of the United States Army. And she won, but at that time there was no Title VII, there was no constitutional or legislative provisions for back pay. And so I had the opportunity to go to high school, I had the opportunity to go to law school, I had the opportunity to come out and take his case into the United States federal courts. At the time the court was the U.S. Court of Claims. And we took his case and we carried his case all the way up to the court, and the 7 judges who heard the court case rendered a 4-3 decision, and we won that case in 1973. And my father was ordered $100,000 of back pay. He was ordered to be promoted to a GS-14, and so he was vindicated. And the beauty of the case and why it became national was not only was it the first case in the nation where an African American was ordered to have retroactive pay due to discrimination, which was handed down not through congressional action, but handed down through executive orders, which Mr. Obama, current president, relies on to some extent. And the case was also national because it created what was called the but-for test, meaning if you prove that there was racial discrimination, that a person was not promoted for any other factor, then the burden of proof shifted to the other party, to in fact the defendant, to show why you were not promoted but for racial discrimination. And so the irony of this was that not only was I assigned as an attorney to monitor the United States and to monitor the United States Army in the payout of these funds, but was also monitoring the Civil Service Commission in terms of the resolution and the decision of the court. And as I would go to court for the years thereafter, both in the federal court and in federal administrative hearings, the judges would always hesitate and say, Mr. Pettit, the rules of evidence herein are governed by Pettit versus the United States. Sir, did you have anything to do with that case? And I always, with great pride, would say, yes, Your Honor, that case was my father, George David Pettit, and I was my father's lawyer. So that's what the book builds around, these cases, and particularly my father's case, because I had the opportunity that few children would ever have, and that is the opportunity to argue and vindicate my father and my mother and my family in terms of them giving up so much for me in terms of their lives to allow me to get an education, which allowed me to make the full circle and go to undergrad and go to law school. But then the book feeds on off into other areas. I had the tremendous opportunity to represent a lot of interesting people in my civil rights practice, and the book lends itself and discusses some of the selected cases that I chose over the period of time. One of the interesting aspect about backing up a little bit into the school case, one of the reasons that they denied my admission to the schools of Aberdeen at the time was the argument that I was mentally inferior and possibly retarded and would not be able to compete with white students. And so they were protecting me from the damage that I could suffer to myself by being not mentally capable to compete with white students. And that to me is such an irony in the development of the book, because not only in my father's case, but in many cases I had the opportunity to litigate and argue the same principles that were enunciated by the defense in my case of me not being prepared to compete with white students. I had the opportunity to argue that principle for years on behalf of other people who were declared to be less qualified or less competent, and who were denied promotions or terminated or other results of other discriminatory actions. And so that is laid out in the book. But the interesting part of the book that I would like to also accent is that I had the great opportunity during my practice over the years to run into a gentleman who at that time was governor of Georgia. And nobody perceived the fact that he was going to be president of the United States. And I had the opportunity to meet him very early, befriend him, and we befriended each other, and had the great opportunity to work in his campaign, that is President Carter, throughout his primary areas and arenas and into his coming to the White House and being president of the United States. In fact, I got a great, fantastic letter from President Carter. Once the book was released, I sent him a copy that he'd added it to his personal library. But this association with Carter also put me back into the primary area of rights and civil rights, because I was the first black or African American to be named to a major state campaign post, according to the Baltimore Sun here in Baltimore City, as his co-chairman for his primary campaign and his general campaign in 1976. Now, this may sound like it's no big thing now that we have an African American president, but that in those days, that was really surreal that I had the opportunity to work in those roles for President Carter. And through that, I had the opportunity to develop a very, very fond attachment to the president, and a very close friendship, as close as one can have in terms of a friendship with the President of the United States. I was there for the Israeli-Egypt peace treaties. I was there for the first state dinner. I was nominated or pushed by President Carter to be U.S. Attorney for Maryland, which would have made me the first African-American U.S. Attorney in the nation for a state in 1976. That was blocked not by Republicans and not by Southerners that was blocked here in Maryland by then Junior Senator Paul Sarbanes. And all of that is laid into the book as to how that developed, how it went, and so forth. So I find the book is very, very, I think, expansive in terms of the historical development of the civil rights movement, not only in the nation, but in Baltimore. I've always said that Baltimore, Maryland was the breeding ground of the African-American civil rights movement. Douglass and Mitchells and Perrin Mitchell and others who came out of Maryland. Clarence Mitchell, who was called Clarence Mitchell Jr., the 101st Senator, and other great blacks in terms of the civil rights movement, all born in and around Baltimore, Maryland. So I think the book is not only very historical in terms of the civil rights background, but is also very forward in terms of the political process nationally, in terms of presidential politics, and where we've come. Just closing out, one of the main reasons that I wrote the book is because we, as a nation right now, have to be so careful. This is a very young nation, and we find, and I find, that we're slipping backwards. When you look at what happened in Florida in terms of stand your ground, which is a ridiculous concept, authorizing civilians to exercise subjective determinations in taking the life of an African-American male. Or we look at what's happening with the voting rights legislation that has now been disassembled and taken apart by the United States Supreme Court. When you look at affirmative action in terms of being dismantled by the United States Supreme Court, we have to be very, very careful and apprehensive as a people and a nation that we do not allow the things that we fought so hard for and shed so much blood as a people to obtain those rights, that we do not allow ourselves to be taken back into a form of bondage. When we look at the heavy prison population and the attack on young African-American males with disproportionate sentencing and draconian penal penalties, and all the things that are taking place across the board to the African-American people, we have to be very, 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 very cognizant of that. And this is one of the reasons I wrote the book, and that's where the name of Under Color of Law comes. But just to give you a brief history of the title, right after the Civil War, African Americans were freed, of course, and we were retaliated to such an extent in the South in terms of viciousness and lynchings and killings and what have you. There needed to be some protection afforded to the African American just freed slaves. And as a result, at that time, the President of the United States was President Grant, Ulysses S. Grant. And he went to Congress and asked for legislation to in fact authorize the United States government to go in the South and crush the Klan and the other people who were acting under color of law. Police commissioners, mayors, and senators, and what have you, who were acting against African Americans under the authorization of law. And this statute became 42 U.S.C. 1942. And that's 42, I'm sorry, 3, is the statute which not only gave authorization to the federal government to go into the South and crush these illegal activities that were being manifested upon African Americans, but also empowered civil action to be authorized and brought by African Americans in federal courts. And that's what gave rise to the litigation that we have seen over the years that established not only our rights of freedom and our rights of suffrage and the civil rights acts that were passed, but gave us the protections of the federal courts in terms of civil damages for those persons who would in fact offend and embark and destroy our protected constitutional rights. And that's where the name Under Color of Law comes about. And that's what the book attempts to tie all together. And that's why I believe that it will be great reading and interesting reading and historical reading. And I urge all to in fact obtain a copy of Under Color of Law. And this is the book, Under Color of Law, published by iUniverse. It can be obtained through iUniverse.com. The publisher, it can be obtained through Barnes & Noble, and it can be obtained through Amazon.com. And I hope you enjoy it and find it beneficial. Thank you.